Hello friends, Mama Fox here. In this week's video, I am going to be sharing my very positive C-section story. Now, if you just stumbled across this video, but perhaps you are debating whether or not to have an elective C-section, or perhaps you are pregnant and you're just worried that you might need to have a C-section, and if that's the case, welcome. I am here to tell you that a C-section, from my experience, is nothing that scary. But first of all, a brief introduction to myself. My channel is called Mama Fox and Company. Every week I post videos on a motherhood and budget-friendly lifestyle. So if that's your jam, click like and subscribe, and check back every Monday for new videos. But in this video, I'm just going to be drinking my coffee because it's more of a friendly chit-chat video, and I find it easier to chit-chat with people while I'm drinking coffee. It's one of my deals. But anyway, a brief story to how my daughter was born. My daughter was born in November of 2020. I expected to have a traditional vaginal birth, but that didn't exactly happen because what ended up happening was I went to a doctor's appointment, and kind of based on what the doctor saw on her scan, she realized that her heart rate wasn't really doing what she thought it should be doing, so she sent me to the hospital to get induced. Like around midnight that night, I started having contractions, and I was in labor the entire day, the next day. It honestly was not the most pleasant experience. Kind of looking back, I don't really remember it that specifically. But I think that's kind of common with giving birth. You kind of black out for certain points. But kind of basically, after I had been in labor for almost 24 hours. She was still too high up in my pelvic region, so the doctors decided it was better if I just had a C-section. Now, at 2 points during my labor, actually, she almost needed a emergency C-section. We had all the paper signed and everything just in case, because her heart rate kept dropping during the labor process. But unfortunately, that kind of evened out. But she was still too high up in my pelvic area, so they still thought it was better for me to have a C-section. But so they wheeled me into the C-section area. I was kind of blacking out at that point because I was just so exhausted. So, again, details are a little bit hazy. But I remember it was kind of cold in the C-section room, and I was on a table that was really narrow, and my arms were pinned to the side. So, but it could be all of the drugs I was on, but it kind of felt like I was on a crucifix, but in the most peaceful sense of the word, if that makes sense. And yeah, like I said, kind of details are hazy. I know my husband had to get suited up for the C-section, and when I saw him back in the room, at first I didn't even recognize who he was. I just thought, who's this new attractive doctor standing next to me? Again, I was totally out of it at that point. But before any C-section, the doctor will kind of poke around your tummy to make sure you are completely numb. But when he did this, I noticed I could feel everything he was doing on my left side, which kind of made sense because I had an epidural, but I could feel all this pain on my left side. So basically, the epidural just wasn't really doing much at that point. So they gave me more drugs, so I was completely numb. And but then they started the C-section. It takes about 10 minutes to get the baby out, and about 20 minutes to stitch you back up. During the whole C-section experience, I was just very calm, very peaceful. I didn't feel anything. Now, kind of going in, I never wanted a C-section. I never expected to have a C-section, because the thought of someone cutting me open was just really scary to me. But no, as it was all happening, I didn't feel a thing. I just kind of drifted off into a nice, peaceful place. I wouldn't say I blacked out. I'd say I whited out because that seems more calm and peaceful. And yeah, but then I heard my daughter cry for the first time, and that kind of brought me back to consciousness. I started talking more. Like, I noticed she had a lot of hair when she was first born, but that was one of the first things I realized. And yeah, they said she was all happy and healthy. And but then my husband went around the curtain to actually see her up close for the first time. Now, here is a tip for any husband whose wife is having a C-section. When my husband went around the curtain, he said it looked like I was having an autopsy. I guess it can look kind of graphic. So when the doctors say, don't look behind the curtain, I guess what they mean is don't look behind the curtain. Just kind of focus on the baby. And but try to ignore what the doctors are doing, because I guess the doctors know what they're doing, so just let them do their job. And my husband brought my daughter around for the first time. That's when I saw her for the first time. And yeah, it was really not that different from giving birth vaginally. But this was my first birth, but I think the end result is actually very similar to giving birth vaginally. You get to see your daughter for the first time. You get to hold her on by your chest. And I think one of the differences between giving birth vaginally and having a C-section, but when I first saw her, I was in this state of just peace instead of just complete exhaustion like you would have after a vaginal delivery. And after I got to hold her, they wheeled me into the C-section, the recovery room. And I think that's when they checked out my daughter to make sure she was all happy and healthy. But again, the details get kind of fuzzy again. But I was in the C-section the recovery room for like about an hour. Like eventually they brought my daughter in with me. And then we all went to the mommy and baby room, which is in the hospital. And we stayed there for 3 days. But I guess it was kind of nice staying there for an extra day. But if you have a C-section, you are in the hospital for an extra day just for observation. So it was kind of nice to just kind of relax there for an extra day without having to worry like about leaving as soon as possible. And after I had a quick nap, my nurse came in to see how I was doing, and she was very, very surprised to see that I was already up and walking around. Like, I still felt kind of numb in the C-section area, but yeah, I didn't really feel any pain. I think partially it was because there was still some drugs in my system, obviously. But yeah, I was doing very well. I was up, I was walking around. I felt kind of numb, but not numb enough that I couldn't walk or anything. And but while I was in the hospital, they continued to give me but just oral pain medication. I think it was like Tylenol 3. But my body reacted to that very well. Like, I didn't feel like looped up or anything. But then after 3 days, we went home as usual, and I continued to recover. From my C-section, but it was a very easy recovery for me. And that's one of the reasons why I am posting this video, because some women are afraid to have a C-section because they're like afraid of the whole recovery process. But from my experience, I had a very good recovery, 0 complications, and I think women have to hear stories like this so they're not quite as afraid to have a C-section if that ends up happening. I'm kind of losing my light. There we go. But there are a few things to know about having a C-section. I think the first thing to understand is that any labor can end in a C-section. I know we all go into the hospital with this like birth plan we have in our heads and on paper, but in reality, your child has their own kind of birth plan. So the best thing to do is just remain flexible. Some people think the way to remain calm is by trying to control every little aspect, but I actually found that being flexible actually helped me stay calm throughout the whole process. but I was pregnant all throughout the pandemic, so I guess early on in my pregnancy, I learned to be pretty flexible because we had no idea what the world was gonna do. But I actually passed my pregnancy test March of 2020, so yeah, that was a really crazy week. And from that point forward, we were just kind of living in the moment, as we say. And I would say living in the moment is a good mental state to be in while you're in the delivery room because you have no idea what is going to happen. Even if you think that you're going to have a vaginal delivery, but you should still do research on what having a C-section is because you really have no idea what's going to happen. And like another thing to keep in mind is if you are having a C-section, they say you can't wear metal jewelry to the C-section room. So, like if you're having a elective C-section, don't even bother wearing jewelry to the hospital. And even if you think you are going to have a traditional vaginal birth, don't bother wearing jewelry to the hospital because, like I said, you have no idea what direction this whole thing is going to go in. So just kind of be prepared for a C-section right from the beginning, just in case. I would also say to bring a stool softener with you to the hospital because it could be because of all the drugs from the epidural and from the C-section. Yeah, your poops are going to be pretty hard for definitely the duration of the hospital stay but if not longer. So yes, you definitely need to go in with a stool softener to make that process easier. Another thing to keep in mind if you are having a C-section is they say you can't drive for 4 weeks. So yes, it can be a little bit more of an invasive process. I think they say that because after a C-section, but you might have a harder time hitting. The brake pedal. At least that's what I heard once on the internet. I don't know if that's true or not, but yes, that they do say after you have a C-section, you shouldn't really drive for 4 weeks. So yes, that is another thing to keep in mind. And yes, after having a C-section, it can be a little bit harder to walk at times, but I think the best way to handle that is to actually keep moving, because I think that helps the scar tissue kind of heal up, I believe. So yes, I mean, but having a C-section maybe isn't exactly the most pleasurable experience, but yeah, it's definitely comparable to giving birth. And yeah, you are in no way less of a mom. It is still an intense procedure, and you in no way took the easy way out. Like one of the main things is to remember that whether you give birth vaginally or through a C-section, giving birth through a C-section does not make you any less of a mom. Some people think the only way to give birth is vaginally, but that is just not the case. Sometimes babies have to come out through the tummy, and it in no way makes you any less of a mother, any less of a woman. It's just sometimes the way that your labor ended up. But C-sections actually save lives. So because I see it, my little C-section scar is actually like a testament to modern medicine. Like in fact, I really love my C-section scar. It's not that big, and but you really can't even see it, even when I wear a bikini, because it kind of comes up a little bit higher. And it's really interesting to see my C-section scar and think that my daughter used to be this really and think my daughter used to be this tiny. But in fact, one day I'm going to show my daughter my scar and say, "Yep, you used to be that big." And in all honesty, if I did ever have to do this again, I would probably say elective C-section, because my C-section experience was just so positive. But that is just me. We all have the right to choose how we want to give birth, and that is personally what I would choose if I ever had to do this again. So I hope this video helped you understand exactly what goes on during a C-section. And I hope this video lessened your fear if perhaps you heard you may have to have a C-section. It can be a very happy, very positive experience. So thank you for listening to my story. I know I kind of rambled a little bit, but if you have any more questions about what happens during a C-section, just comment down below. I will happily respond to your questions and comments. And I will see you next Monday for my new video. Bye for now.